Welcome to Voices of the Industry, a podcast by the AI Localization Think Tank, which aims to bring together diverse voices from our industry to engage in the conversation about how AI is impacting what we do. Today, we are very lucky to have with us Magda Jagucka Miller. Thank you so much, Magda, for being here today with us.
Belen, thanks so much for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Magda has so many years of experience in the localization industry, especially more on the multimedia side, which is fascinating. And more recently, she's taking a new adventure and a new journey that she will tell us in a minute. So yes, Magda, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about your career in the localization industry and your current role as a consultant in your newest solopreneur project.
That'll be my pleasure. Thanks so much. My career in localization really began in the early 2000s. I went to London with a friend for what was supposed to be just a 3-month adventure. And I had just graduated from one of the top universities in Poland with a master's degree in English. And my focus was on psycholinguistics. And my thesis was on American Sign Language acquisition by deaf and hard of hearing children. So little did I know that a few years later I was going to actually work with accessibility. So that was really helpful. But that 3-month trip quickly turned into 5 years. So instead of joining a short ESL program, English as a second language, just wanting to be more immersed in the language and the culture because I wanted to become a translator, I actually ended up enrolling in a postgraduate program in bilingual translation at the University of Westminster. And that's where I discovered audiovisual translation. So if people who are listening to us right now know a little bit about the industry, they won't be surprised to hear when I mention the name Jota, who actually was my lecturer, and she influenced me to the point of no return. Hi, Jota, if you're listening.
And Jota is part of the think tank, so
Yes,
full circle.
full circle, pretty amazing. And after the program ended, I actually applied for an internship at the company that she worked at. And the rest is history for me, really. I loved, this was the 5 years that I stayed with the company for a few years before actually moving to LA on an assignment. So Adventure called me and I felt like that was just the right thing to do. So I relocated to LA and that started a whole new chapter for me. I worked at ECI, that was the company, and I grew some of the major US accounts for the company, made friends with my colleagues and with my clients alike. And some of them still are ongoing after more than 20 years, which is pretty amazing. During my time there, I really took care of all of our accounts, the project management, the workflow, and I was the conduit, the translator, so to speak, between the customers here and our European branch. And a few years later, ECI was acquired by Deluxe. And at Deluxe, my role expanded exponentially. And I was also very lucky to relocate to Montreal for a few years, where I led the client services team over there. And after about 3 years, I decided to come back to LA and made that my permanent home. So that was, I think, a pretty adventurous journey. So being part of the industry really allowed me to travel, which was also one of my lifelong dreams as well to realize. So that was already a big plus. And at Deluxe, I moved from an account director role to director of operations to VP, and eventually landed as a senior VP role of global operations. And over more than a decade, I oversaw multiple departments there, built new ones, and supported many company-wide initiatives. And some of my proudest moments, Belen, includes building a new department, which was the Translator Community Program, which you know quite a lot about because you actually did that. And that program was wildly successful. And a few years ago, I shifted gears into solopreneurship and started a company called We Collaborative, which is a coaching and consulting company. And that reflects my belief that change happens together. And my mission is to partner with individuals and with companies to help them thrive through change. So that's the story.
Thank you so much. Super fascinating journey you had, a citizen of the world and always open to a new adventure. I love that about you.
Yes.
And for our audience who don't know, that is true that Magda hired me at Deluxe and we worked together. She was my boss, one of the best bosses I ever had in my career. So I'm so happy to be here today interviewing you. But yeah, so much has been learned in this journey of yours in multiple roles, and now you can finally bring that together in a meaningful project as a solopreneur. So I'm really happy to hear about that. And because we had a really good relationship when we talk a lot about the localization industry and how things are evolving and all that. In one of our previous chats, you actually mentioned a concept or a framework called People, Process, and Technology, PPT for short. And I thought that was really interesting. So I wanted to ask you if you could explain that for our audience.
I'll be very happy to. Yes. So this framework really came to me at the time when I needed to prepare for a presentation for one of the companies that Deluxe acquired at the time. And someone came to me and said, look, I would love for you to present to my team, and I would really love for them to learn what is unique and special about localization at Deluxe. So I needed something simple, memorable, but also very true and rooted in reality. So I started thinking about what is it that makes the operation, the team unique and successful. And I think three things came to mind: people, process, and technology. And that's how I started looking at operations through that lens then, but then continued to keep thinking about it. And now I'm really relying on that heavily as well in my consulting practice. When I think about people, I think about the expertise, the commitment, the culture, right? The skills, the capabilities. So the question is, do we have the right people in the right roles? Do we have the right amount of people? And I think that's just really one of the foundational pillars of having a successful team. Then when I thought about the processes can be very complex, right? And can be complicated. But when you think about when, you're operating at scale, which we did, think about whether the process is fit for purpose, right? Whether the process can withstand the test of time, but also the test of scale. So all those aspects, right, goes into how the process is engineered and how it is executed by the people. So that's where you already have the overlap there. And then finally, the technology is, do you have the right tools to actually execute on your vision and to actually have your processes sort of be repeatable, sustainable, and set for long-term success? And at the time when I was thinking about that, what came to mind is we were already several years post-acquisition of a cloud-native platform called Sphera. We've transformed and transitioned all our workflows into the cloud, and that also allowed us to move into the COVID phase very easily without a major hit. So when I thought about those three principles and those three pillars, I was like, okay, I think I got something there. And the beauty of this framework is that it is not a ladder, right? I don't really look at it as you start with technology or you start with the process or you start with the people. It's actually like a flywheel, right? Because you're looking what works in one aspect of your operation. And then you say, what does it make possible for the other element to work well? And then how does that sort of propel the success in another aspect? And it just like starts to turn itself. And you can start analyzing anything with this process at any point. You don't have to start with people. You don't have to start with process or technology. You can start anywhere and you can keep going. And then you can find some answers to the questions that you have. What might be a challenge at the moment? Why aren't we building something that's yielding results? Let's take a look at any of these aspects. Yeah, I still believe in this right now. When you have the right people in the right roles, when your process is built for purpose, and when you have the right tools to support your ecosystem completely, you really have a pretty good setup. This framework applies for me beyond localization because you can ask those questions anywhere. Do you have the right people? Are they ready for change? If you're talking about change, do you have the processes that are going to withstand the pressure of time and disruption, transformation? And also, do you have the right technology that's going to support the other aspects? So that's how this came.
Yes, no, I love it because I feel like, especially lately with all the AI boom, hype, however we want to call it, most companies or most people are focusing only on technology and sometimes forgetting about the
Mm.
people and the process. And it's like, how do we throw this technology at anything? And it's not such a holistic approach as you were describing now. And that takes me to the next question that I wanted to ask you, which is related to change management, right? You mentioned this because, okay, you have this new technology, so exciting, so cool. I will just throw it at things and hope for the best, right? Without really properly managing that change. This is something that we've been seeing. And usually when I talk to people at LSPs or enterprises, customers of ours, usually they report that one of the biggest hurdles of transformation and really making an impact with AI is the change management part, right? And in my experience, very few companies really manage this really well. Very few companies nail change management because it's so hard. No one likes change. It's super hard to do it. So this is something that we're still learning how to do properly. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think about it? What are the common pitfalls and mistakes that you've seen, or that from talking to other people, how to manage change? And do you have any tips to get it right?
If I knew all the answers, life would be so easy. But I'll try my best because change management is one of my favorite topics. And this is why We Collaborative also exists. Change thriving. How do you thrive through change, right? So I like to start there. But yes, it is one of the hardest things organizations face as an entity. I like to think about an organization as an organism, right? So when you think about that, people who make up that organization are the ones who actually are experiencing the change. And change is hard. And we're not really wired to jump at any change and adapt to it just so quickly. So I'll start with a few pitfalls because you asked me, why is it so hard? And as I was reflecting on this question, I thought I'll start with maybe something that is an obvious solution, but not an obvious problem, right? So I think companies really treat change like a project, right? They hire a PMO, project management office, number of project managers who are rightfully licensed, trained in managing a project large scale, but change is not a project only, right? You're not really managing the milestones. Yes, this is a really important part of it, right? You need to have a plan, you need to have a strategy, you need to know when things need to happen, and if you're on track, because these kind of things, change is time bound, right? But change can happen over micro steps and then compound it into a bigger impact. So I think when change is treated like a project, it becomes hard because you're looking at a number of different elements in that organization or in the ecosystem that need to actually move together at the same pace. And that's not what's happening. And some people, especially, are really like left behind because there are a number of, I won't say profiles, that people are representing or depict. When you think about change, there are those who are skeptics, right? And they run into it and they're cynical about a change. Then there are those who are thinking like, why is it happening to me? So thinking like a victim of the change. No, I don't want to. And then there are some who are, okay, reluctantly getting along. And then there are those who are really the change makers, right? Your change agents, like enthusiastic about anything, just put me on a project. But when you think about all of that, it's really at the core of it is the capability, right? So change as a project, but add on to it as a capability. Is your organization really capable of truly, really seeing this change through? To be successful, change requires much more than those milestones and timelines and a plan and ownership. Yes, it requires people to shift the way they think about the future, but also about the now. So it's multiple aspects of it. So the now, the future, it requires them to change how they act and how they behave. So how do you influence the mindset? How do you influence the behavior to ultimately influence, what in change management really is what change management is how they see themselves. So to me, change on an individual level is shifting an identity, right? You're becoming someone who is doing something different and thinking something different. And as an organization, you're also shifting the identity of an organization. So you need to be very clear of what the organization is going to become. How is that going to look like? And then at the unit level, the cells, which are the people who are doing all of this, they need to represent that as well. So change requires behavior change, culture change, and ultimately an identity change. A couple other things that come to mind, I just throw it out there. It's projectitis. Too many initiatives, too many projects all at once. And you think about when you have this great project and it's going, and then suddenly you've got, oh my goodness, what is happening? This is now creating another project, right? We need to do an offshoot. So projects are growing arms and legs and become projects on their own. Change initiatives tend to be under-resourced. And when I say that is when you engage with leaders, managers who are running day-to-day operations, that becomes a challenge because now you have to drive the car and change the wheel at the same time. So you need to think about how you're going to deploy these resources a little differently. And what it means to me is you need to allow people who are part of this change management to have time to not only do their day-to-day job, but to also think more strategically about what that future looks like. How are we really going to enable this capability across the entire organization? And thinking is one thing, and then giving them time to experiment and act. Right? So there is an aspect of that as well. And then when I mentioned there are a few different profiles of people, how they experience the change and how they show up, I also think that a lot of the time change becomes forced on people. That's why you have this sort of resistance, right? And when we think about leadership, such as getting a little bit disappointed with that reaction, because it's a response and a reaction, they start to think that we just need to be more forceful. But that's not really the answer, to be more forceful. You really need to, I look at it as not an obstacle. I look at it as an opportunity. What is it telling me as a leader that I'm not really realizing or that I don't want to hear? So when you think about this, oh, we've got a resistance. I want to know why this resistance shows up. So then I want to actually act and help those people who are showing up. It's, I don't understand this, I don't want to do this, and work with that. So it's an opportunity because at the end of the day, when you listen to this is what you're solving for, right? It becomes a problem that you need to find a solution for. So my approach is a little different. And after learning so much about the various initiatives, the projectitis, it becomes a real thing. My approach is different. I look at it at the complexity. I look at the complexity of the problem, and I want to see what is the true impact that we're going to really see through this change. And someone recently said, to what end? I love that, to think about to what end are we going really to implement this change, or think about why this change is even needed. Right? I look at designing the processes, this change management, to think about what do people really need, right? How is this process going to look like? And what is going to support this? How is it all going to come together? So I like to think about bringing people as co-creators of the change and really thinking with them and allowing them to experience and explore and also bring solutions. And probably that to me is a winning recipe for change management. And I also like to think in terms of a framework of three, the foresight, insight, hindsight. When you're embarking on a change, I like to think about what is the best or the worst case scenario here. So which one are we choosing, right? And what are we going to do about that? So the foresight ahead of time. And as you're going through your plan, your project, your change management capabilities, implementation, you gather insights as you go along, and then you can pivot. So agility is really what that comes in. And then last but not least is learning from what you've done, right? So that's the hindsight. And I think a lot of the failures aren't really taken seriously, and they are repeated later on. So you think about what makes it successful is just follow simple common sense practices. And you can have a successful change management.
Yeah, that's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing all that. What you said about change cannot be managed just as a project, right? Like the project part is a part of it, of course, that it's important because you need to progress and like track progress and all that. But change management is really about what you said about changing behavior of people and changing the company culture. And you can force that on people, but it's important to have the buy-in of all the stakeholders, as you said, and have that alignment. People need to feel that what they are doing makes sense for them and still gets them excited about what they do, and not transform what they do into something that they hate, because yes, you can force change on them, but at the end of the day they will feel disconnected from the project, from the company, and that's not a good way to manage change, in my opinion. So everything that you said really resonated with me, and I think it's all about the people at the end of the day, as you said, and how to give them what they need, and really understand what they need through through this process, and how you can get them engaged basically in the change. So
Spot on.
yeah,
We
thank you
are
so much.
aligned.
Yes, totally. Just one mind. And speaking of change, of course, in the last couple of years, we are all probably already tired of speaking about AI and the impact. That's why we're here in the think tank. But many things have been changing, and things are going certain ways in certain places, in certain companies. How AI is being integrated in the companies is different, right? I remember, I want to share this anecdote because it's really something that kind of made me think a lot. One day that we were in LA, I was in LA I don't remember, last year was it? And you were driving me through the endless roads of LA because everything is super far away from wherever you want to go. So you need a ride. And so we were talking about AI and how AI is influencing our industry. And you said something that was really interesting to me, because you said that companies or the industry is sometimes focusing on replacing the human at the translations. And so we are letting the machine translate, and then the human is reviewing the machine. So we are removing that pleasure from the human to really think and come up with the first draft of that translation. And you suggested that why don't we do the other way around? Why don't we let the human translate, and then use the machine to review, and maybe we skip the review step depending on the workflow and all that. But why don't we use the machine to review what the human crafted with their soul and heart? And I think this is really related to, I was talking about this in my latest article for the think tank, the differentiation between automation and augmentation. So we are, or in the industry is more headed to automation. Let's replace the human and forget about it. But maybe it would be more interesting to think about how to augment the human workflows to achieve better quality, faster turnaround times, and so on and so forth. So I found that very refreshing when we were discussing about it. And I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on that and your thoughts on this augmentation versus automation, and how do you see the industry going with the AI implementation?
I'm so glad that it really struck a chord with you, because I feel like sometimes you think these thoughts and is it really resonating? And I like to go by my intuition a lot. Obviously, this was one of those things. Because when you think about what are we really solving for, right? At the end of the day, I do think that there are a lot of processes or there's a lot of content out there that is probably okay with an AI first workflow. I call it AI first, right? So what is the first step? You employ AI and then you let AI do most of the work, right? And so that's okay because there's some content that really is repeatable, that it doesn't really require a lot of creative input. And when you think about in terms of the sort of technologist and engineering mindset, what gets automated is the repeatable stuff, right? Recurring repeatable stuff. So I think from the engineering standpoint, a translation as a task is considered repeatable because there are probably so many different phrases that show up in text all the time. And mostly what we're dealing with is text-based translation, not talking about interpreting right now. So that's a completely different point of view. But within text-based translation, this task is considered a repeatable task, right? So how can we replace or replicate that through automation? And so when that is working well, sure, AI first, absolutely. And then you can have a translator who is an expert in the subject and an expert in translation to actually review that, tweak it as we think. This is just about tweaking, right? Make sure that contextually it's all good, right? And grammatically and whatnot. So yes, have a pass. But when you think about what a lot of translation really is a creative process, right? And the creative process as it is, but it relies on many different modalities of input. So essentially what AI is dealing with is text, but within that text, there are no aspects such as the tone of voice, the context of a scene when we're talking about audiovisual translation. And that applies to gaming as well, I would believe. So there's a lot of elements and aspects of it that sort of goes through subconscious level of the translator, which basically represents their situational, embodied, grounded knowledge. And that's what AI doesn't have at the moment, right? So where is it going to get that context? It doesn't really have it. So what it outputs is okay, but is it what we're going for? Sometimes it's just really totally not okay. So the translation process versus the review process are two different cognitive processes. Not a lot of translators really like to correct, even being proofreaders, right? The role, they're like, oh, I could have done it so much better. Oh, it takes me so much time to proofread. Combination of a good translator and a good proofreader is great. When you have an okay translator and a good proofreader, there is friction already. And when you have an output that really requires a lot of thinking and a lot of tweaking, and a person that finds themselves to have to rewrite a 70%, 50%, that's a lot of effort. And so you start questioning, why am I doing this? So this is just like a contextualizing my answer. So when I thought, what would be a better solution to this, right? Thinking, is AI first really the thing to apply here? So I thought, what if we give humans the role that right now they are still better at, and give technology the role that technology excels at. And that combination is augmenting the capabilities of the human and also shining the spotlight on the technology, because technology can do amazing things. And so I thought, what if the translator, who is a professional, right, does the first pass, does their creative input, and already timeline wise, right, people are squeezed for time, but they're still doing a good job in that first pass. And so what happens, instead of spending time on scheduling, coordination, picking who is the next person who's going to proofread that, how much am I going to pay them? Like, obviously costs are really a huge thing, right? This is a lot of where money and time is spent in the coordination part. So I'm thinking, what if the translator gets the best tool that they can get that kind of resembles this spell check, grammar check, right? And also a creative check, because I think AI today works really well when it gets good input and it actually can spin that and give you suggestions for what could be a little bit better. So if you give that tool to the translator, that they can actually do that one step and be proud of the authorship, but also have a tool that helps them do things completely and faster, and they can learn from it as well. Because I think that's another aspect of it. When you are in the process of creation, you're like, I want to move on to the next thing. No, you pause here and you learn, where did you do well? What was the issues that you actually kept repeating? Is this something that you really need to look and improve next and implement? So it's a self-learning tool. So I thought, okay, this is something that I would really stand behind, and I'd love to see this happen. I'm not sure if anyone's doing this at the moment, because it's all AI first. Let's get this first step cut down to fraction of a process and a cost, but then you have to spend time finding people who are going to post edit. That takes time, because the reality is that it's not just a simple post edit process. And then cost wise, I'm not so sure that the return on investment is really there. And here's a kicker, because I think that was also interesting and important in our conversation, is I went to have a conversation with Claude. I like both Claude and ChatGPT, but I had a conversation with Claude. I asked it, what do you think about AI first translation? What are the signals and the signs that this is why this is happening? And it came back with a similar approach and said, AI first is really great, besides the economical sort of pressures, yes, all of that. But AI first is really great when you have truly like repeatable stuff that AI can learn and be just really repeating what it was before. And then when we started having a conversation about creative content, it said, no, in this case, my recommendation would be to reverse the scenario and flip the script. So how do you flip the script? You actually give a human the first pass, and you design the tool automation to help the translator actually just really be the author that they can, and help them just do whatever checks, help them collaborate, help them be more creative in that process. And I think our script is a lot of the times backwards. Or maybe people haven't realized that there is a third way, because I think to me this is another way. So experimenting in that aspect is empowering humans really to be creative, but
Yeah,
give them the tools.
yeah, totally. I love this vision, Magda, and I think if our industry were more user-centric on the
Mm.
supply chain part of
Mm-hmm.
things, I think things would be way more different, and probably we would have very interesting solutions that we couldn't think about today in like align with this vision that you have. And when developing a product, Veronica Haila, who is also part of the think tank, she mentioned the other day that because she developed this software as well, that people always use the tools in a way that you could have not imagined. So
Mm-hmm.
you developed a tool and with these features thinking that you would do this or that, but then people start using it in their own ways, and you cannot always be in the head of the user. So if we would put the translators, for example, at the center of how TMS are being developed, AI
Mm-hmm.
workflows are being developed, I think we would find really interesting ways of going about workflows that would also save probably time and money still, but in a
Mm-hmm.
different way, in a more human-centric way. So thank you for sharing your vision, because I really loved it when you told me this a few months ago. And I'm loving it today even more because you elaborated more. So thank you so much for that. And unfortunately, we are arriving at the end of this episode, but it's been such a pleasure to have you here today, Magda. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your insights with us.
Thanks so much for allowing me to be one of the voices in the industry. And so I am Super happy to be here, and I hope people enjoy it.
Yes, I'm sure they will. And if you have any question, feel free to reach out to Magda. You can find her on LinkedIn, learn more about her new project, We Collaborative, and see you in the next episode. Remember to like and subscribe, and see you around. Bye.
Bye.